right, next we're going to have Michael Daly come up with from the Unitarian Universalist congregation of South Fork. Woohoo.
Good afternoon. Just because we haven't doesn't mean we can't. It's a process. I was born and raised Catholic, classic altar boy, choir boy, parish council. And over the years, I've attended Presbyterian church, Episcopalian church. 25 years ago, I became born again. I accepted Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior, and I got a hall pass to confessions forever because no longer did I need an intermediary. But in truth, it also solidified my personal relationship with God. So, but I found the Bible church world to not be an ethos that I could live with long term. I found them patriarchal in nature. I recall first attending the UUCSF in Bridgehampton almost 4 years ago to this day. And someone had told me, they're a really nice group of people who are not stuck on religion. So I had to check it out. My first time, 2 times, I came late and left early, which is your classic way of coming in and not getting snagged or cornered by anybody. But each time I walked into a room with nearly everyone smiling, hugging, shaking and holding hands. And I'm like, it was like a scene from the movie Cocoon, you know? It was like, what got into these people? A bunch of retired white hippies is basically what I walked into. And jealously, many of them had been to Woodstock, and I was just a little too young to get there. On my 3rd or 4th visit, I read in the bulletin that the congregation was preparing for their new minister, Kimberly Quinn Johnson from New Jersey. So, of course, what did I do? Mr. Google, Kimberly Quinn Johnson. And up came several people, but finally settled on this Kimberly Quinn Johnson affiliated with the UU. And I said, that Kimberly Quinn Johnson? She was a woman of color. And I was like, wow, that's pretty cool. So maybe I am going to stick around here for a while because these people obviously have got something going on if they are picking a minister, a woman of color as minister. And it has been interesting, very interesting over the last 4 years. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we're doing or have done, what we're trying to do, and then what we're struggling with. Since 2015, Reverend Kimberly has become an ordained minister, and this year our settled minister. I became her first new member recruit, and this past July was called as a reluctant president of the Board of Trustees. Reluctant not because I didn't want to serve or that I didn't feel like it was a good place for me, but reluctant because I didn't feel prepared to serve. But after the 6th time and looking around at who else, I said, okay, but I'm going to need everyone's support, and they have been very supportive, the rest of the board. Our meeting house has become a center for social justice meetings, although our congregation does not have a social justice committee. People from all over the East End come to our meeting house to gather with groups such as Racial Justice East End, the Organization for Latinx Americans. We host book readings such as New York Times bestselling author Mr. Colson Whitehead, who recently read from his book, The Nickel Boys, which follows 2 boys struggling through their sentences at an abusive reform school under the specter of segregation in the 1960s. We recently hosted activists from around the state and the New York chapter of the Poor People's Campaign as they toured the Shinnecock Nation, the Shinnecock Indian Nation in Southampton as part of their bus van tour, seeking to understand the struggle of communities directly impacted by governmental policies. We co-host the March for Interdependence an alternative to the traditional Star-Spangled Bannered 4th of July parade, a family-friendly walk to peacefully advocate for the dismantling of policies leading to family separation at the borders, mass incarceration of women of color, and the tragedy of missing Indigenous women. We host an annual Seder and the Muslim celebration, Ramadan. Reverend Kimberly is a three-quarter minister who speaks at libraries, neighboring churches, and community centers throughout the East End. And she travels around the country working with youth and serving in leadership of Blue, Black Lives UU, and other UUA roles. We're truly blessed to have her as our minister, as I am blessed to have her as a mentor and a sounding board. My safe place to ask questions about how a person of color sees issues of white supremacy and patriarchy and how I conduct myself. Carol Holstein, here today, and her husband David have done services on their visits to historic civil rights sites in the South and to Nicaragua with a group led by the College of Social Justice and hosted by the UU Service Committee Stewardship Circle in 2018. Their trip was split between hearing from professionals outlining history, politics, and current situations affecting women and other groups, and then visiting with several grassroots groups dealing with women and the environment. Carol has also served on our board of trustees and in leadership for our Helping Hands Fund. David also serves along with former President Mark Potter on the board of the Long Island UU Fund, which provided grants in 2018 totaling $242,000. I represented our congregation at the Living Legacy Civil Rights Pilgrimage in March of this year with several people in this room, thanks to Reverend Hope and Dr. Janice for their guidance. And I was there with Amy and Kimberly and Margaret and Linda, and it was a life-changing experience for me. We invited our members to attend the fall program. I held my first service this summer on dismantling white supremacy and patriarchy, where I clearly bit off more than the members in the audience were able to chew. And I was told that. I'll be attending the Harper Jordan Blue Symposium in Minnesota this next weekend, along with the Allies for Racial Equity symposium or a joint conference that will be going on. We've introduced our congregation to the UU Allies for Racial Equity, a UU group building an anti-racist movement among white Unitarian Universalists. We formed a Moral Mondays group, an intentional white space, with an invitation to talk about racism. Our last meeting was the watch party for the babies and bailouts, where we raised $1,000 towards the fund to support mothers and babies. This year, we received a very generous bequest of $800,000, and we're in the process of forming a $100,000 high-impact community outreach fund. So while it actually felt good to put this together of the things that we've accomplished, what I'm left with and what we're left with is we are still a white, aging congregation with a black minister. I don't believe we have any arrogant people in our congregation, but racism, whether it's based from arrogance or ignorance, is still racism. Many that participate in social justice events come from outside our congregation, and they don't come to worship, while many who worship don't come to our social justice meetings. Our ethos around money is one of scarcity and lack rather than abundance and generosity. Moral Mondays fizzled because all but two of us didn't feel comfortable being in an intentional white space. We used the gray hymnal much more than the teal hymnal, and I'm sorry, folks, but the songs in that gray hymnal make me feel like a pilgrim. And I think music is an important part about our services, and we've got to figure that out. God bless our drummer today. At a recent service about lynching in the U.S., Kimberly went deep and talked about it, and after service, a couple of members said to me, God, did she have to really beat us over the head with it? And I said, you should talk to her about that. I think she'd like to have a conversation with you. No one has. Dealing with white entitlement is intimidating, awkward, and full of stumbling blocks. We must be determined to do this intentional work, and we need to do this work with a fierce love. This work centers on releasing the chains of white supremacy while intentionally creating action that builds truly inclusive, beloved communities and creating opportunities to be on the right side of history. And we're going to keep trying. Out on the table is a little piece that I wrote called "The White Supremacy Peel: A Message to White People." I'd invite you to pick up a copy if you'd like to. Thank you very much.